All I've been blessed with in this there was I was imprisoned by the powers of one honest
Thank you for coming. If you go to page 3 of the program, you will see the Dr. Seuss quote and why it's so important to me. It says, don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. And it almost didn't happen. It almost didn't be. There was a party in Los Angeles 24 years ago. And I was in a crappy mood, a really, really pissy mood. I go, I'm not going to this party. And my friend Petey McFarland, who lives in Houston now, said, you dragged me there. He goes, you're going. I go, fine, I'll go. I go, I'm not going to talk to anybody. He goes, that's not even possible. He goes, you never shut up. True enough, I did pitch to Ron. And not only that, but Ron wasn't the type that would walk across the room. I needed to do that to meet, otherwise it wouldn't have happened. And that meeting, that party, I didn't even know where President was. I said, I didn't see it on the coast. And I moved to Fresno about 9 months later, and that day changed our lives in ways that I can't even imagine possible. It made our dreams come true. We were just right for each other, we really were. Everything about our families was equal to, it was interesting. Ron has a sister Maureen, I have a sister Maureen. They both had dogs named Ginger. Both our dads. My dad is Richard Mikens, his dad is Richard Avedisian. We have Larry's. Larry Myers, my brother Larry. My dad was an engineer, so was Larry Myers. That's why I did so well with the Myers, I can change years quickly. Ron did not. Ron did not like change at all. I helped him with that. So this, that quote is so important to me. In life, a lot of things don't happen. And Ron was always saying, make it happen, no matter what we were doing in our 24 years, because you make shit happen. And so I'm so grateful for that quote, and it did happen. And we just had a wonderful 24 years with that. Now, some of you may be wondering why there's chocolates on the table. I gave Ron flowers only once. Only once. And he said, well, you know, they're once you cut them, they're dead. And they belong in the green bin. And I said, now you want me to put them in a bucket of water. It's a vase. Bucket. He wants to revive them and keep them alive for a while. And so that didn't work, so I said, all right, what do you want? Chocolate. Chocolate cake, chocolate cookies, fudge. And so I never bought him flowers again, always chocolate. So I figured in his honor, there's chocolates on the table. And if your speeches go a little too long, you can eat the chocolate. You can eat the chocolate before the meal. Okay. Now I want to introduce Peter Robertson, and he's going to run today's program, and he's going to tell you how things will work, and then later on he'll be up here and speak on Ron's behalf as well. Peter Robertson.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I was with Ron the day after, with Gary the day after Ron had passed, and I know Gary's been planning this for a really long time because of COVID. It's been complicated, but it really means a lot that you're here. I've never had a pause for a memorial service, so that's my first. Thank you so much. So we're going to have some family members speak, and the first one is Jim Avedisian.
I am overwhelmed with all the people. This is just wonderful. Just wonderful. Ron, let me introduce some people at the table right here. This is the immediate family table. And Gary everybody knows, I think, but I want to introduce Gary first. To his right is our sister, Maureen, her husband, Larry. On the other side of the table is my wife, Anne Marie. I'm Jim, I'm Ron's brother. I think I'll make it today. And Larry, Gary's brother, and Jay, who is like a son to Ron and Gary. Over here is what I'm calling our cousins here. A bunch of Armenians and a bunch of Swedes. Ron was half Swedish and half Armenian. A wonderful combination. Maureen asked me to read a note from her. And I said I would, and I'm not sure I'm as brave now as I was when I said I would, but I'm going to do that. My memories, this is Maureen speaking, my memories of Ron began one day when I was walking home from school, and my dad, the usually calm, collected policeman, drove up, waving his arms and honking his horn. I ran up to the car, not knowing what to expect. He yelled out, "You have a new baby brother." And that was Ron. One of my earliest moments was that Ron was a very curious little boy, always trying to figure out how things worked. When he was 6 years old, a neighbor lady came over to announce that whenever little Ron walked through the neighborhood, all the electricity would go off. It turns out that Ron was the culprit. Locating and flipping all the switches in the boxes, the electric boxes, on all the neighbors' electric boxes. And from Ron's point of view, he was just trying to understand how this worked. When Maureen and Larry moved to San Francisco, Ron would visit. And one of the things he would never forget was riding up to Twin Peaks with Larry and getting his picture taken on the motorcycle. That picture is right up here. We didn't know all about Ron then, but he was a motorcycle guy. We just didn't know that. When Maureen and Larry, when we moved to the suburbs, it seemed we always had several backyard projects going on. On one of Ron's visits, Larry and Jeff and Bob and Kelly are Ron's nephews and niece who couldn't make it today, but they tried their best. Anyway, on one of Ron's visits, Larry and Jeff and Bob were having trouble drilling 6-foot deep holes in what amounted to a very dry, hard clay surface to install posts for a retaining wall. The kids were young, and while they were making some progress, they definitely needed some help holding on to the jackhammer, I guess it was. So I suggested Ron would help. This is Maureen talking about her brother. He volunteered Ron. And he would be an excellent fourth man to help. After some convincing, he said okay. Several sore arms and sore backs later, the result was a project success. Another time when the kids were in college, Ron helped Larry lift up to a 400-pound wooden basketball backboard and walk it into 2 8-foot trenches. Not an easy task. It was another success that Ron often talked about. However, after that, Ron would always ask what projects we had going before he decided to visit or not. One of the things we know about Ron is he was smart. He asked the questions first, and he did help whenever he could. Maureen says, I remember it was always great to talk to Ron about any subject. And he was always glad to help out any way he could, whether it was during our visits to Fresno or his trips to Alamo, where Maureen and Larry lived. Maureen says, I will always be thankful I was able to talk to Ron during his last days and tell him how much I loved him and what he meant to me. I will always have my wonderful memories of Ron to cherish. Thank you, Maureen. I have two daughters. They were unable to make it today, but they also wrote a note. My daughters are Julie and Sandy. Ron was age 16 when Julie was born, and age 18 when Sandy was born. We grew up visiting our grandparents, and my daughters called my parents Dammy and Papa. So we grew up visiting our Dammy and Papa and seeing Ron regularly during those grandparent visits. So we enjoyed his company over the years as kids with every visit. We still like to call him Uncle Ron. Until we were over 40 years old, because he held a soft spot in our hearts. That was a term of endearment to be able to, for us to be able to call him Uncle Ron. Ron had many amazing qualities, and when I give my own little few words, you'll hear me say amazing several times. He was. He was an amazingly kind, gentle soul. This is from his nieces. He was brilliant yet modest, and serious yet fun. We loved his cute little laugh. And Ron had a little giggle, as some of you may have. Where that came from, I'm not quite sure, because this didn't come from his brother, at least as far as I know. And hear his voice of acceptance and reason. He always made an effort to talk with us. At family gatherings and reunions, we always appreciated it. In fact, when Julie was diagnosed with breast cancer, he reached out to her by phone, having the cancer issue in common with his niece and Ron. It was so thoughtful, the caring he showed her, and he demonstrated to her by his actions that life continues on beyond and through the cancer treatments. One of our favorite memories of him was with our family playing the game Rubik's Cube. Some of you may know that board game. Well, Ron would intently study the board and figure out his next moves. And those of you who know him best, you could just kind of see him. And he was deliberate. Well, he was a fierce competitor, no surprise, but a wonderful sport. And we always marveled at his amazing tidy room with his collections and his various passions. Unfortunately, we did not inherit the tidiness in the family. Ron we would call him a neatnik in some ways. And we curiously watched his particular habit using his reclining chair. We called it his rocking chair. It was a lounge chair. And that it really wasn't acceptable at all if anybody else sat there when Ron was home. So we accepted it. It made Ron happy to sit in his recliner with the perfect view of the TV as he watched his beloved football games. And as his nieces, we curiously watched him make the correct referee hand signals when the play was over. Whether it was a touchdown or incomplete pass, or Ron knew all of that. Once in a while, the phone would ring from the referees. And say, Ron,
Oh, good.
we don't know if Ron knew, but we were so proud of him when he came out as gay and shared his life with Gary. We tried to share that with Ron on our last telephone conversation. And because Ron always seemed to take things in stride, he just said thank you. But to all the years after he came out, it was like watching a flower blossom, beauty in its natural environment. We both remember how thoughtful and caring Uncle Ron was, as he never missed a birthday, never missed Christmas, because he always sent us a card. And we knew how good it feels, and you all know how good it feels to receive cards. And he did that for my daughters. If we want anything for those we have, it's for them to be happy in their lifetime, to hold joy in their heart, and to feel that they are loved. And we think Ron had that in his life. With much credit to Gary and the life that they built together. We are grateful for the joy Ron had in his life, and we are grateful to Gary for the gifts that he made to their uncle and my brother. So to Ron, I hope you knew how very much we love and admire and care for you. Your absence in our lives is very difficult. We had hoped for so many more years when you could meet your great-grandson, Julie's son, Gavin. And being able to learn from him, from his brilliant great-uncle, about sports and maybe physics too. But you live on in our hearts and memories, and memories as bright as day. Always your nieces. Well, it's my turn. When I talked to Gary about giving a talk, I was pretty brave, and I said, sure. Get my Kleenex out here, just in case. Last Tuesday, October 19th, Ron would have been 65 years old. When we were young, and maybe now that we're not so young, 65, or when we were young, I should say, 65 was old. You retired. 65 is pretty young now. Pretty young. Too young for Ron to leave us. It's really hard. It's really hard. Today we're celebrating the life of an amazing guy. Ron, I think of two words, and they're not enough, but two words. The guy was smart. The guy was knowledgeable. You could talk with him about most anything. And he and I used to have talks. He wasn't too busy at his job, and I wasn't too busy at my job, and we talked on the phone. Emery and I live up in the Bay Area, so we didn't get down here all the time. But Ron and I would talk about things. And I want to mention a few things that we talked about to show what an amazing guy Ron was. One, we talked about medicine. Maybe I shouldn't say medicine, but medical ideas. About 10, 12 years ago, I had a brain bleed. Brain bleed sounds pretty bad. And brain bleed is a stroke. I talked to Ron about that. And he said, yeah, Jim, you have a fistula. I said, okay, Ron, tell me a little bit more about that. He said, well, you have a connection in your brain between an artery and a vein. And blood is flowing between those two between that artery and vein, and it shouldn't be. And he said, it's congenital. You were born with this. It was a flaw in my brain. And it explains a lot of what I have done since then. Well, a little while later, I went to the doctor, and I said, you know, doctor, I had a stroke. I had a blood. How's that going to affect me? Should I avoid stress? You know, how should I live my life so that I don't have another brain bleed? And the doctor said, well, we fixed it. We put some platinum coils in your head and blocked off the fistula, and you'll be fine, and you don't have to worry about it. And it is congenital. And I said, well, you know, doctor, that's what my brother said. And he said, is your brother a doctor? I said, no, Ron's not a doctor. He's a physicist, but he knows everything. So Ron and I got that medical term all straightened out. Another thing we talked about was the law. And Ron and I would talk about cases. And early in the 2000s, we would talk about, well, this same-sex marriage issue is coming up. Should we push it and get to the Supreme Court? Or should we just kind of lay back and let the public opinion gather and be more accepting? Well, as it turned out, in 2013, there was a case that Ron and I talked about called the Windsor Case. And some of you may know about the Windsor Case. Two ladies were married and were in New York, and the IRS said, we're not recognizing your marriage. And there was a law at the time, and you can imagine these two brothers talking about this stuff. So I'm on my phone, he's on it, and there was a law called DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, and it said, this is federal law, Congress, and it said a marriage is a relationship between a man and a woman. And these two women were denied a tax deduction. And as Ron would tell you, it was not simply a tax deduction, it was an estate tax deduction. The Windsor case was a tax case. And Ron and I could talk about taxes, even though that's what I do, and he didn't, but he knew all about it. And the Supreme Court said, DOMA, that law is unconstitutional. It violates the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. And we talked about that. And a couple years later, in 2015, another case came up. I need a little help on this one. Obergefell, 2015. And then the Supreme Court came out and said, not only is it unconstitutional under the Fifth Amendment, the federal government, it's unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. The states have to recognize same-sex marriage. And Ron and I would talk about that. That was an interesting conversation for the two of us. Another item that we talked about was travel. Now at this point, this is when, Gary, I want to acknowledge and thank you for adding to Ron's life. What you did and where the two of you went. And I don't know the half of it, but I note some undertones. I know that you went to New York City at least once, if not more than that. I know you went to Cooperstown and the Baseball Hall of Fame. And recently, I know that you and Ron went to Detroit and went to the Motown Museum and the Ford Museum. And Ron and I talked about those things. And we shared our thoughts about it. And it made me so happy. Ron, Gary, you did it. You did it. And I thank you for that. We know you would have gone, Gary, you and Ron would have gone to many more places. And Ron wasn't able to, but what you did was wonderful. Some other subjects that Ron and I talked about, well, I should say one of the subjects that Ron and I did not talk about was physics. I didn't know a thing about it, and so that would have been a one-sided conversation. And so we didn't talk about physics. But we did talk about stamp collecting. And you may not know that Ron and I shared stamp collecting. And we talked about his parliamentarian work. And I think there's some other people that may add to that today. And we talked about sports. Ron was a fan of the Golden State Warriors. He was a fan of the San Francisco 49ers. He was a fan of the San Francisco Giants. He knew his sports. That we inherited from our dad. We shared an interest in another sport that you may not know about, and that was auto racing. Fresno, I've been away for a number of years. Fresno is a hot spot for car racing. And in the 50s, the winner of the Indianapolis 500 race was from Fresno. And he won it twice. And so this is a car, I call Fresno a car town. And Ron and I shared that. And we talked about going to the Indy 500. And I think, Larry, you were part of that conversation at times. And we were going to go with our dad. And then our dad got sick, and we couldn't make it. And so after our dad died, Ron said to me, Jim, you still want to go to Indy? I said, Ron, yes, let's go. And Ron got tickets, and in those days, tickets to the Indy 500 were very difficult to get. You had to order them the day after the prior year's race.
Oh.
And so the 93, this was the 93 race was over, and Ron ordered tickets. We have in our family a nephew of Ron's who saved the ticket. This is my ticket. Ron and I went to Indy. And he came to San Francisco, and he also arranged for a motel. And we went to Chicago, changed planes, and went to Indianapolis. We scouted out where we were going to park. For any of you who know about the Indy 500, particularly then, it was a madhouse. And we didn't want to get too close to the racetrack, or we wouldn't get in time for the start of the race. So we parked about 2 miles away and walked. And we got there early in the morning and got there and showed the guy our tickets, and we got in. Well, there was a little warm-up of the cars. And any of you who are car racing fans, no, they don't put mufflers on these cars. The noise was unbelievable. And they went around the track, and they were getting ready to start the race. We were on turn 3, and here come 33 cars, 3 abreast, 11 deep, so loud that Ron and I couldn't hear each other. Couldn't talk to each other. It was so loud. And here come those cars, and it was amazing. I'll never forget that, Ron. I knew that was going to be the hardest part. We're talking about 2 brothers just sharing an interest in life. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. And so today, we celebrate Ron's life. An amazing guy. All of these interests that I've talked about, and I just from talking with some of you, I know he had so many other interests that I hope we hear about today. And he was so smart and so knowledgeable. We could talk to him about most anything. And so in conclusion, I've been up here longer than I thought. In conclusion, Maureen and I want to say to all of you that we are mighty proud to be Ron's sister and brother. Thank you.
We have other family members that are gonna speak.
Sandy.
What?
Sandy, all right. Thank you, Sandy.
I just have to get this ready. I thought I had it ready. Talk amongst yourselves. Some of you, a few of you know me, but my name is Sandy, or Sandra Rao Farkas, and I am Ron's cousin, and my mother Elaine and Ron's mother Dorothy were sisters. That's where the Swedish part comes in, in case you're wondering. And the other thing was that Ron and I were the youngest in our families. So I was 5 years older than Ron, so I was very proud of that. Except Ron was a lot smarter than I was. It was very hard growing up knowing that he had already memorized all of the Dr. Seuss books. You know, doesn't every child do that? So Gary, where did Gary go? He already knew that quote, but anyway. But he also did have his little other side, you know, where he got the wheelbarrow, so he filled it full of dirt and dumped it in the living room. Every child does that too. So anyway, so I was always in awe of Ron from a very, very young age. And our families used to get together and we would, you know, go swimming and we would play and we did all of those normal things that families would do as you're growing up. I grew up in Kingsburg, and Ron and the rest of the family grew up in Fresno on Illinois. That's where I remember. And they had the wonderful Cadillac, right? Was in awe of that too. So anyway, you knew that Ron was different also because he was very quiet, but he was also very perceptive about everything. You knew that he was taking in everything, even as a young child. So the other thing that I also knew is that Uncle Dick never got mad at Ron, but Aunt Dorothy did. So I could always count on that, right? And Ron always has Aunt Dorothy's little smile, right? Not Uncle Dick's. And then our families lost touch for a while, so we were not in contact. And then we sort of came back together, and Ron and I got our master's degree at the same time at Fresno State. So of course, we had our party together. And it was fabulous reconnecting and getting together again. And then Ron met Gary. And I told my mother at least once, twice, 3 times, 6 times, I don't know, that Gary was the best thing that ever happened to Ron. Because he brought out the best in Ron, and Ron brought out the best in Gary. And Gary made Ron more open, and Ron really blossomed on him at that point. He was older, but he did, as it was mentioned before, he just blossomed, and it was so lovely to see. And then Gary and Ron, as happenstance in the early 90s, moved in or rented a house right behind me. So we said, okay, let's have a party. So we decided that we would start a family reunion on our side of the family, and we would hold it over at the new house. So we started doing that, the three of us. And that was really a hoot. And my mom acted as a school teacher that she was and pointed things out. And then, do you remember that? And then Larry's birthday is June 19th, right? 17th?
What's that?
In your birthday,
22nd.
22nd.
Who's counting?
Well, yours is the 22nd, mine's the 25th. So it was about that time, so we had, of course, another birthday cake. We always have cake, you know. So we were doing all of that. And then that sort of went by the wayside. And then it didn't matter to Ron, and to Gary, so the two of them, after I married Joe, we just started having our own party, and we would go back and forth and go back and forth, and we would have dinner at my house, their house, our house, their house, or we would go out, and we continued this over the years, just making sure that our family continued. And that's what was so important to Ron, is that family continued. And that touched my heart beyond measure, because that was what was so important to me. So I cannot begin to tell you, you know, Ron was intelligent, and he was a beautiful person, and he was kind, and he would do anything for anybody, but he also valued family. And he would never overtly tell you that. He showed it. He absolutely showed it and walked his talk. So I had found this little poem, and you know, Ron was not Mr. Flowers and all of that, but I thought this was very appropriate for something that he would like. So I would like to read it to you. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother beside you, walking the street beside you. And then when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give to them to give to me what you would give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live on in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. Thank you.
I have a note from my mom. You know, I was the first person in our family to go to the Folsom Street Fair. Gary, I think, was number 2. I'm sure it doesn't end there. Yeah, my mother and my dad aren't here because my dad had a stroke and he's kind of hobbled, so they would love to be here, but here's her note. Dear Gary, for Ron's memorial. When I first met Ron, he must have been about 10 years old. His Aunt Marion would tell stories about her visits to see her brother Dick and sister-in-law Dorothy. While Dick was at work, Dorothy and my mother-in-law, Mary and Jebian, would talk for hours while Ron was left to entertain himself. Always something would happen. One time, all the lights went out. Ron had switched all the circuit breakers to off. He was a curious kid, like Nobel Prize winner Richard P. Feynman. No wonder Ron went on to major in physics in college. When Lee and I would visit occasionally, Ron was always kind and polite. He was mostly quiet, like we were, without enough to say to get a conversation going. Much later, when Gary joined us at the Armenian reunions, it was easier to have conversations. My last memories of Ron were from the reunion held in Santa Cruz at Alan and Melissa's house. I had a chance to talk with Ron and Gary side by side. Ron wasn't feeling very well, so we were trying to find something he could eat. Then, when Ron was in hospice, Lee talked with him on the phone. And thank you, Gary, for encouraging that. Love, Win.
Is it your turn, Gary? Okay. All right.
Oh, sorry, I messed up. Excuse me.
My turn. This was the semester I met Ron at Fresno State. He was the parliamentarian for student government, and he's a role he had for a long time. He's gotten his bachelor's in science and physics, and now he was working on his master of science degree. And he was a little bit more not out than I was at that time, and a little bit more conservative than I was at that time. I was a lot more out than he was at that time, and a lot more liberal than he was at that time. And in the interest of brevity, I'm just going to tell you that when he told me that he was gay, I was flabbergasted. And it's not very often in my life when I'm speechless, but that was one of those times. And so I think I remember him telling me the reason he came out is because he met Gary. You were that impetus. So I wanted to share that because that was just very special for me. I think I met Gary when you moved to Fresno.
First person.
The first person I met Gary. So today was very special. Hearing these stories are just amazing and lovely. I can see him turning off the lights and stopping at the toilets, and I can just imagine that he did. I can't even. I love it. I love these stories. A group of friends of ours started a scholarship at Fresno State in 2006, and Ron and Gary one of the first donors. And so I'm really grateful to Gary for allowing donations to this fund. We raised $601,000, and if you're interested, please let us know. I've got to do my pitch, Gary. Sorry, professional fundraiser.
That's what you do.
That's what we do. Just thank you so much for being here. And I love Jim. I love the stories. This is just beautiful. And meeting. And he's talked about you and Maureen. I've known Sandy for a long time, so this is a very special day. A lot of friends here today. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce Lisa Kaya, who works with me at Fresno State. Was it you?
Yeah.
Oh,
I read the order messed up. Sorry.
okay. Just bear with us. Anyways, thank you so much. Thank you. Lisa, you're after Gary.
I messed up the order, sorry.
That's okay.
Ron had a 40-year career as a parliamentarian, seriously. And I didn't even know what the hell it was. But I knew that the Robert's Rules of Order ruled the day. It's the reason that people have meetings without chaos. They hired Ron. He did all these things. We have about too many of these in the house. And right after he started his career when he was at Fresno State with students, with Scott Vick. And I received this note after Ron passed away from someone, and he said, you made an amazing impact on my life, and I want to thank you for being an incredible person. And it was Scott Vick. I said, I don't know who Scott is. I've never, and I called Peter. Peter knows him. And he said he used to be the student body president of ASI, president of state. Ron was a parliamentarian for years, and we got this article that, and Ron saved, see, Peter had a blurry part of the article. I didn't have, there's no way for me to read it. And I said, wait, there's this little stack of college newspapers in the corner of one of the rooms. I never messed with this stuff. I said, I'll bet you have it. I found 6 copies of it. Pristine condition, 33 years ago, of that article. So we have the real deal here. I contacted Scott in LA, and he wanted to be here. He couldn't. So he wrote the most wonderful note, and it had far more to do than just his work as a parliamentarian. It goes like this. If I like it. What is the measure of a man? What does it mean to have lived a good life? Is it the number of toys or things I had? You can have a lot of toys. Is it the number of plaques, trophies, awards? Or is it the number of smiles, goodwill, hope, and love? You know, awards, trophies, plaques, they get put away, sometimes lost. But the smiles, the love, the hope, and the goodwill that a person like Ron has, they never go away. They don't rust. You cannot be thrown away. They just continue to reverberate. Ron was a kind, gentle, reserved, adorably quirky, scientifically nerdy, good-natured, always willing to help others, thoughtful, and self-sacrificing. I once lamented to him that most of my friends are sports fanatics, but I don't know a damn thing about sports. So Ron got out to sports pages and taught me and tutored me on all the different sports teams, so I could have intelligent conversations with friends. So I failed, but it was no fault of Ron's for trying. And you remember one hot summer after semester, he decided to take an advanced physics course by mistake. He really only needed basic physics, but he was in way over his head. And Ron tutored him every single day. Who does that? He did it for free, with no complaints. He just wanted to get him a passing grade. And that was what Ron did. He helped people when they needed. Oh, boy. The last time I saw Ron was October 2017. How can I say this? From the old days of President of State, Ron was a horrible dresser. He seemed to wear the same shirt and pants. When I met him, he did too. He had it going for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He had him labeled. This is before Steve Jobs made it cool. But when I saw Ron in 2017, he was spiffy and a sharp dresser. No doubt Gary had a lot to do with this. I did. I took him shopping. He didn't want to go. And I said, you need to go. You really need to go. If I want to be with you in public, you need to go. So I turned back to the comment that Ron's goodness will never be succumb to time. It will always be there. I believe that the good Ron had done reverberates today here in this room will continue forever. Where rock hits a pond, there are ripples. Ron's goodwill, kindness, love will always be there. Now, Ron was more of a science type. They probably say it was different. Let's see. Sorry. So let's translate into something Ron would probably appreciate. The first law of thermodynamics says that energy can be transformed from one to another, but neither created nor destroyed. Thus, Ron, if we apply the law of thermodynamics to you, it means that with every word of encouragement, act of love you showed, and things can never be destroyed. They don't cease to exist, they simply reverberate through time. Leaving this room, we can give wings to Ron, goodness for being the type of person he was. Goodbye, Ron. And I need to meet Scott. I'm going to meet him in LA when I get a chance to get down there. Because what he did for Scott was incredible. And that was back in 1980. But that started his love of He attended 120 consecutive meetings for the President of the State Student Body Senate as a parliamentarian, helping them out. And it was a lot of controversy. They actually changed 300 bylaws. It was absolute chaos. Ron was asked to do this. Then he went on to lots of other organizations, the American Institute of Parliamentarians, National Association of Parliamentarians, and he held a position of president of AIP. And his swan song was 2 years ago. He finished a 2-year stint as bylaws chairman for the National Association of Parliamentarians. And I helped him out with that too because he was going through chemo, but he wouldn't quit. He would absolutely not quit at all with that. So I helped him get through that process and to do that. I have a note from one of the other parliamentarians. And it just shows you how he would let, if he was down, he wouldn't let that stop him at all. Ronald Avedisian was one of the finest people I've ever known. This is from Ann Rumpel, who was also former president of one of the parliamentary groups. Ronald Avedisian is one of the finest people I've ever known and brilliant professional parliamentarian. I always enjoyed talking to Ron at events hosted by the NIP and AIP. I watched Ron take his exam to achieve credentials in AIP. It's a Certified Professional Parliamentarian exam. It's a 2-hour oral exam, that's all. So you have to be sharp. The event is conducted by a period of other CPPs. In-depth questions are asked about various performance authorities. Therefore, the examinee must be well prepared to be successful. You must answer questions correctly. Ron took the CPP exam under very difficult circumstances. He had the flu, and he still showed up, and he wouldn't cancel. He wanted to take that damn test. Well, he passed. However, he refused the panel's offer to postpone or delay. He said, no, let's do it. Let's rock. And he was ready. So yes, Ron was a very intelligent and determined parliamentarian. I recruited Ron to serve on a committee I chaired for AIP, where we provided pro bono answers to parliamentarian questions. And it's something they did for free, and I have something to add to that after I finish the letter. And then Ron went on to chair the bylaws chairman for the final group of bylaw amendments back in Las Vegas in 2019. It was a great privilege to know Ron and to call him friend. Good memories of a good man. Ron never let the illness stop him with anything. I mean, there was a picture up there a little while ago of where Ron was in chemo, and he has a soda in one hand, he's got headphones on, and a book, and he's smiling. He's hooked up these machines. And I posted that on Facebook. Somebody said, okay, now it looks like you're just having fun. That's how he was. And we had an agreement during chemo that we can't talk about anything serious. I mean, everything we talk about has to be fun, even if we have things to talk about, which is always fun. He says, you can't be like Walt White's wife, like in Breaking Bad, where she nagged the hell out of him during chemo. And so we always did that. We were always, grateful for all that. His work as a parliamentarian, I actually learned quite a bit from that. Because the first time I went to one of the conventions, my goodness, like 4 people on the board of directors popped out as gay. Then they all started bringing their spouses, because nobody brought their spouses. I would go out touring things and saying things, and I would take Ron and the other ones back to everything. That's the best any city could offer. I mean, generally speaking, they might only have time to visit 1 or 2 sites, because they're on business, but I would find the 1 or 2 sites that they needed to go to. Well, I thought that, But then everybody started bringing their spouses. So we changed, that was over 20 years ago, that we're able to change that. I'm proud of Ron's work as a parliamentarian. He, I have some great memories. I mean, in Las Vegas, somebody spoke for a whole minute. Ron's on stage with 400 people in a ballroom, and somebody's on stage. I'm in the back taking pictures, and I was for like a solid minute. And Ron was getting clearly annoyed. I had the camera focused on him. Finally, puts his hands on his hip. I go, I got the shot I wanted. And the man stopped talking, and Ron said, was there a question in there? There really wasn't anything. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. And Ron said later on, he saw me with the camera. He could see me in the back of the room. So he goes, did you get that? I go, yeah. I got that shot, but it was just wonderful. I would help him, or I would even help him prepare for workshops. He would go over the points, and sometimes he'd try to stretch a presentation. I go, tell me exactly, give me some examples of point 2 and point 3. They sound exactly the same. He goes, no one's going to ask that. I go, give me the examples of how they're different. And he couldn't answer the question. I got him to delete one. We were stretching it. You can't answer that question. I mean, I don't even know a lot about Parliament, but it doesn't make any sense. You can't give me an example. So I learned a lot about parliamentary law. And well, he did it more as a passion. He didn't do it to make money. But we had a call once. It was an emergency. This group was having a board of directors meeting, and he needed him the next day. And Ron was busy at work. We didn't have cell phones back then. And I had no idea what he charged. And I said, well, it's going to be $200 an hour. And when I did reach Ron, he goes, well, you just doubled my rates. I go, well, they'll pay it. And then they hired him for a whole year's worth of board meetings, 2 or 3 hours each for the next year and a half. And it was this gun group here in Fresno. They had lots of guns. And then a couple years later, they lost Ron's phone number. This scary looking guy comes to the front door, and I peek over. I go, Ron, someone shouldn't answer the door. He goes, oh, that's Jack. Because he got a gun clearly in his holster. So I'm thinking, do I want to answer the door? And it needed Ron again. He had lost the number, but he somehow knew where we lived. Which was also scary. Do that. But he just had a real passion for it. So we actually did pretty well after that. We had lots of, he never lowered the rate. And if someone didn't pay it, he goes, well, I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. We were getting older. And then finally he said to me, he goes, I don't care what. I was not allowed to accept anymore on his behalf. He did not want to do it anymore. He goes, even if they give you 300, even if they give you 400, I could probably get anything you want. He goes, no. He goes, do not accept any more engagements. I'm done. I've done enough for this. One of the things with bylaws that's interesting is that, I want to talk a lot about it. Most companies, boards get into trouble. They change a bylaw, but they don't take out the language that they changed. So you've got conflicting language. They fix something with new words, but they left the old one in. So there's a big fight. And that's why they hire attorneys, and that's why they hire parliamentarians. And one time we were watching the news in Congress, Justice Roberts was up there on the podium, and they were doing something in the Senate, and all of a sudden somebody whispered in Justice Roberts' mouth, and he smiled. He goes, he didn't have to make the call. He goes, the Senate parliamentarian just informed me that we are all out of order. I love that. You felt a real sense of power there over these senators, and even Justice Roberts didn't want to have to deal with it and do that. So it was. I learned a lot about parliamentary procedure. It's not really. It's just. He had a lot of time for it. He had a lot of respect for it. I had respect for what he did, and we did really well. We accepted a lot of engagements after that with him. I don't think he realized the value of it, because he was the only one in town in Fresno. So I knew that too. So I said, we're definitely going to do that. We did that once with the Philharmonic. I was a parliamentarian.
Save our
We
symphony.
were trying to save our symphony, and he did a lot. I think he did that for free. You're right. There's a lot. Why didn't I charge you? No, I think we wanted to save. I did not. We wanted to save Raymond Harvey. He was basically being fired because it was a big article in the paper. He came out as gay, and also his spouse was white and he was black, and it was a mess. But we tried. We tried real hard. And the day after he accepted Peter, I think to do that with the Philharmonic, we got a call from the Philharmonic. They wanted to hire him on the other side. They said, no, I've already been retained on the other side. So clearly there was a big fight with that. But I just love it. I made friends with a lot of people, the parliamentarians through the years, and we got to travel everywhere. He learned this from Jim, from his brother Jim, that yes, you're going there for the meeting, but there's lots of other things you can do besides just go to the meeting. You know what I mean? And we traveled everywhere. I would only go to cities that I had an interest in. know, so I would go to San Antonio with, but still, I would find what I could do with that, and we just had a wonderful time doing all of that, and I loved watching Ron speak. There was the last time in Las Vegas, somebody said they didn't like the change Ron made, and Ron goes, well, I'm not going to be National Bylaws Chairman forever. In fact, in 3 days, I won't care. I'll be done. Totally done with this. And he started off that meeting really funny. He didn't give him a microphone. He said, so I'm just going to have to yell at you. And I'd forgotten I even had that on video, but I was there videoing that particular meeting with that because he asked me to. I miss so much of this. And even though parliamentary law sounds dull, I still miss it. There's a lot of common sense behind every rule, and seriously, and that's wrong. You had common sense where sometimes I did not. Let me just follow up something else besides the parliamentary note about what Jim said. It was everything recorded on every one of them. And then about a year later, he was trying to find something, and it literally took him 45 minutes to find which tape it was on. I go, how's that working for you? I had taped over something he had because I thought they were all blanks. And I said, you can't do that. So we just didn't, I don't know, we always had, we didn't mess with each other's stuff. So this year I had to watch the Indy 500, and I had the flags out there for every caution, every red, you know. And even, I wasn't even taking calls if people called if they didn't want to miss something in the race. Ron certainly wouldn't take calls on that. And another thing that Jim said about our traveling, Jim, you travel the world and with your tax workshops. Ron was so thrilled when he found out when we went to the Ford Motor Museum in Detroit that Jim had never been there. Because I finally found a place, and it was the only place we've ever been to. We've been in a lot of places, and Jim has never been there, and he's too old to go now. He won't be back. So he knew that was going to stick. I don't think I've ever told you that, Jim. He knew that was going to stick. And we got to go everywhere. We went to Hawaii, we went to Alaska last couple of years, we went to Mexico. And he was never big on international travel, because he said there's so many things to see domestically. So we focused on that. But he wanted to go to Mexico and Canada, so we got that in. And he was happy. He was happy with international, with getting those things done. He was just so logical. I learned to read him as to what he wanted. And because he always said, just make it happen. Just whatever it happened to be, it was just make it happen. And we did. I mean, we're so grateful that he retired 4 years ago. We did a lot more traveling last couple of years. And until 2019, we did a little too much. Like Ron would always say, go, 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 Gary. And then sometimes he'd say, whoa, 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 Tom, you've gone too far. And in 2019, we went to Alaska. We went to Vancouver. We went to Seattle. We went to Boston. We went to New York. We went to Cleveland. We went to Detroit. Where else? Las Vegas. And then finally Ron goes, stop! Just don't. No more. It was like September of that year. And we didn't know the pandemic was going to come. And so that was really the end until we made a trip in 2020 in September, 3 months before he passed. And I was not allowed to tell anybody that we were traveling. Because, you know, it's going to be, he didn't want to be hassled by family. Not hassled, but he was thinking, it's really not the time to travel. But Ron goes, it is. Because he knew he was about to start a new round of chemo, wasn't looking good. And so he wanted to visit Jay, Mike, and others. So we did. I'm so glad we did that trip. Because 6 weeks later, he started getting anemic and, you know, never again. This place is very special to me because it was the last place we went out to eat with Sandy and Joe at the end of October of last year. And so I thought it's most appropriate to come back here and do that. But I'll be back a little bit later to talk about other issues. But parliamentarian stuff is for real, and I enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you. Now next. My boss. Oh, I want to introduce, I've known, Lisa was Ron's boss for the entire time I've been together with him. The entire time.
certainly glad that Gary talked a lot about parliamentarian and stuff, so I can cross that off my list. I might have a few things to say about it, but not as much as I had planned. I was not Ron's boss the entire time. I started off as a student assistant in the office, and Ron and I were colleagues for a very long time. It was kind of funny when I became his boss, you know, because we're pretty flat the way we operate. And just for him, it's like he flipped a switch and it just became like this deference that was kind of, you know, like, stop it. It's just me and it's you, right? So I'd like to start by reading something that some of you, it will really resonate with you. You have been summoned to Deep Space Station K7 by Undersecretary Nils Barris to guard a shipment of quadrotiticate grain. Look in here for what interstellar trader Cyrano Jones wants to show you. I wrote that for him on his 50th birthday. And I put it on in his cubicle, and he knew exactly what to do. He went to his cubicle and the overhead bin, he lifted it up, and all of these tribbles that we had made for him, they all fell out all over. And he just had the biggest smile on his face about that, because what I learned about him is that he had memorized every episode. He knew all the dialogue, he knew all the characters, and so I just thought that was so cool. His favorite character was Dr. Spock, of course, and
Mr. Spock.
Mr. Spock, that's right, Mr. Spock. Yeah, that's, see, you guys know. Ron was our Mr. Spock. He was the Environmental Health and Safety Office's Mr. Spock. He was Fresno State's Mr. Spock. He was the person that brought order, calm, and stability in everything that he did. He became a friend, and I miss him a lot. Yes, he worked at Fresno State from October 1988 until he retired in 2017. When he first started, he and director Dave Churchtigan, they were a busy two-person team. Imagine a campus, it's like a city, right? It has everything in it. All the things that occupational safety and environmental, EPA, OSHA compliance, all of those things needed to be done. There were just two people to do it. And I don't know if you know how fast Ron would walk. And well, Dave Churchtigan Ron would have to like trot to keep up with him. And the two of them were just running around campus all the time, just putting out fires. So what I appreciate most about him, since I'm the director of the department now, is that back then they did the tough work of actually setting up all the systems that protect workers, the campus community, and protect the environment from all the things that the campus does. They're the ones that put it all together for us. You heard that saying of don't reinvent the wheel. Well, Ron and Dave, they invented the wheel. And all we do to this day is embellish the wheel, make it a little bit better. And we're always a work in progress, and that's the way Ron always had it. He was always there. He never felt bad if I said, hey, let's like tweak that a little bit. No, he understood that concept. So, because we were such a small team, throughout the time that Ron worked with me, again with me, he's my colleague, he's not my direct report, I didn't really think of it that way. We were all doing so many different things, but Ron was the person who ran radiation safety. So that's non and ionizing radiation safety, for those of you out there who know what that means. He was the faculty whisperer, so to speak. So he also managed our laboratory safety program. He was the one that had to inspect their research facilities, if you can imagine that. an EH&S compliance person stepping into that environment and trying to help them to be safe and do things better. He had a way about him where it wasn't like that. It was like a colleague coming in just to help them get better. That was a really great lesson for all of us. He was our editor. There wasn't a memo that I would send out before I would ask him to look at it. Because he was so kind, and he also knew the right way to be, right? He knew what the goal was, and there was no reason to be heavy-handed about anything. So he would look at my memo and he'd say, soften that one piece there. That I think you'll get more out of it if you do that. About parliamentary whatever, right, that he did, I'm so sorry. We really greatly supported all of those endeavors of his, and he went to those conferences every year that we were allowed to travel. You know, there were some years that we didn't have money for that, but we always, you know, let him go, and I would ask him, it's like, what do you guys do there? Is it, because I couldn't imagine how fun that could be to go. I go, what are all your sessions about? Well, they were about rules. Okay, and to each his own, right? And I'm sure they had, you know, fun times, and Gary kind of touched on that too. And I remember when they were rewriting the Robert's Rules of Orders, or they were tweaking them, and he said, oh, there was lots of shouting, and, you know, I think, Gary, you mentioned that, how people were going to be yelling at him, and I would never imagine that at that conference. You may not have known this about him, too, that he judged all of the local science fairs, the National Science Fair, the local entries, and he did that for many years, and I thought that was really cool. In fact, I found that very inspiring, and so I became the chair of the IRB for the national, the science fair because of him. He inspired me to get involved in that organization. When Ron met Gary, it's true, Ron blossomed. Ron became a different person, and I remember just seeing how happy he was. And Ron told me, he said, Lisa, and because I was single at the time, and he said, Lisa, I know someday you're going to find the love of your life like I did. And sure enough, I did, and he was right about that. Meeting Gary was the best thing that ever happened to him. Ron's Gary was like my Brian. Ron's Gary is the one who, well, I don't like conflict. My Brian loves conflict. I don't know if you love conflict, that's not the right way to say it. It's more that you do not hesitate to step in and get into the fray, to support Ron, to support the man you love, right? And so Gary Ron had many stories where both Ron and I would talk about, oh my God, it's so embarrassing. You know, I want to see the manager. You know, that's, oh no. And Ron and I were the kind that were like, ooh, I think I'll go over here while you guys handle that.
Yeah.
So I think everybody's hungry now. I don't know if anyone else is going to be talking next.
A few more things.
Oh, okay, all right. So one other thing that Ron taught me is to know when to step away from the podium as well. Ron and I had to do a training. Ron was, I forgot to talk about that, is Ron was great at training people, at taking a very complex subject matter and training people about it in a way that they need, just so they learned what they needed to do, right? And he knew his audience, and he would speak to his audience. And so he did almost all of our training. But he and I did a training together one time, and it was early in my career. And we only had 30 minutes, and I had to speak about environmental health and safety, you know, a rather large, broad subject. And Ron was going to was training about radiation safety. And
after about 25 minutes of me yammering on, I just happened to see his face, and the look of, it was just blank. It's like, and he looked at his watch. And I said, oh my, and now here's Ron to talk all about radiation safety in 5 minutes. He didn't, and I never did that again. I learned a lesson. He was an extraordinarily kind, brilliant man, and I miss his visits to our office. After he retired, he came to visit us often, and thank you very much, Gary, for asking me to talk about him.
I'll try to speed this along, we're going a little late. Ron spent maybe 30 years working on the different sports programs. The Bulldog Foundation is the arm for raising money for all of the sports at Fresno State. And the Timeout Club is the basketball group for raising money for basketball. But he didn't really like making the phone calls because he didn't want to get yelled at. The team sucks, I'm not giving you any money. And Ron goes, how do you expect it to get any better? Well, I told him to say that. And so we needed to make the calls to keep our football seats. We had really good red seats. So one year Ron goes, I'm not making the calls. I go, we're going to lose our seats. I said, well, give me the damn list. I'll call them. I did. I called everybody. It says Ronald Avedisian. And I said, we put you down for what you did last year, or do you want to upgrade? I didn't ask if I wanted a donation. I just went full at it. We got them all done. And we just moved on. We got to keep our seats. Ron, in the Timeout Club, he became president of the men's basketball fundraising group, and we did everything. This is back in the Coach Jerry Tarkanian era, and this was over 20 years ago, and it was great. Tark was a great storyteller, and I enjoyed every bit of that. And I would play host, and Ron would get everything done. I would make cookies. Remember Shirley?
Yes.
We'd do the tournaments, and I'd make cookies because the players are really hungry after the tournament. Ron would drive the van around because he liked doing that with the basketball players. And so we did that for a number of years. Ron was one of the things that really bonded us was our love of sports, period. He said the problem I had is I was a Yankee fan, a Syracuse fan, and I was used to winning a lot. And so Ron liked blowouts. He didn't want to see a tight game. He didn't want to see a competitive game. He said, if I lose, he wanted to see a blowout. So one time, I wish Bob was here. I told Bob earlier today, Ron's nephew. We're watching the Golden State Warriors, and they had a 16-point lead with 3 minutes left. And I said, it's safe to come into the room and watch the game. They got outscored 18-1, and they lost that game. And so Ron never believed, well, we had to do it. Last time in the game before he'd come in and see that. When Ron and I were dating, it was March Madness. And so I had to add, well, his nephew played ball for UCLA, and they were in the tournament. So our next date was predicated on when UCLA lost. And when I talked to Bob earlier today, he says, do you mean you were rooting against us? I said, well, not exactly, but as long as you kept on winning, we had to wait to meet. Our next date delayed our meeting. So I was kind of happy when he did go down. That meant we could have our date and move on. But it's just great. We just love sports. We love events. Everything from the Indy 500 to every type of event you can imagine. We got to go to the U.S. Open up in San Francisco a couple years ago. We did lots of things. Just everything you can imagine with that. I'll be brief. Ron loved all sorts of transportation. He did so many things. He zip-lined in Hawaii. He flew his first plane. Where's Douglas? Pilot. He gave Ron his first flying lesson. He didn't know it, though. It was going to happen that day. We get in the plane, and Douglas says, well, you're sitting in the wrong spot. You need to be in the captain's seat. You're flying this plane today. And we flew from Santa Monica to Catalina. So he got to do that. He drove an ATV in Alaska. I wouldn't do it. Well, I'm not a good driver. Anyway. So he drove the ATV in Alaska. For his 60th birthday, I got him one of those racing things. You get to drive either a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. And we did that for his 60th. He chose the Lamborghini. jet ski to Key West. And Key West is another one of those places that we don't talk about traveling wise. We love that resort there where you didn't need to pack any clothing. It's true. Although we would dress. Even though you don't have to. We just got to do so many things with that, and it was fantastic. It's about everything he wanted to do. He did want to get a pilot's license, we just didn't get around to it. He talked about it. He talked about wanting to do that. This golfing trophy here. This made it look like nothing. It was every week he would play miniature golf. He did it for 30 years with his friend Steve. Okay? Now, he had 60, anyone who's played golf knows it's not a fair sport. Right? But no. They had 68 rules. Correct the fair. So they said if you hit a certain shot and you knock it into that hole, if it gets a bad bounce, they get it to spot the ball differently. So I joined them. It's ridiculous. So I finally annoyed his friend so much that I had to step away from that. I thought, no, they're playing for this trophy. It's very competitive. They would line up a shot, and I would hit the ball really hard because there's a wall behind it, so it's going to bounce off the wall. Won't lose it. So there was no break. If you hit it hard enough, there's no break. And they said they would hit it softly, it would curve around. So they got nothing from my shot. So I had to step away from that though, because it was going to ruin their competition. And he wouldn't take the trophy because he didn't beat him. I said, all right, next time we get in town, play me, you'll beat me, and you can have the trophy. Because Ron wants you to have it, but he won't take it unless he wins. So he didn't win against Ron, but he can win against me. So I want him to have that. Here's something that's really great. For their 45th high school reunion, Ron, we went there in 2019, and there was someone, I saw some part of Ron I never saw before. He went around from table to table, hugging people, taking pictures, shaking hands, everything. And I go, who is this man? He didn't call him, not once, he called him in several hours. And he said, well, I know how to do it. My dad could work a room, Jim could work a room, and I watched you do it for 2 decades. So I know how to do it, because I don't want to do it. I did it now for 2 hours, it'll take time's up, I'm done. And I'm never going to do this again. And he did that. It was so wonderful to see him. So he was paying attention to what all these other people did. It's just a matter of, I don't have to do that. And he came over to me and grabbed me and introduced me to people. I'm used to doing the opposite with Ron. So it was so interesting to see a different side of Ron. It's like, where did this come from? Okay, I'll be brief. We're almost done. I played Lisa mentioned the science fair. I forgot all about it. He was a judge science fair for 30 years, I think. Yeah, always a good time. And he gave me a break too. I didn't have to make dinner that night. He got pizza with kids. He loved that too. There were like, I think 6 or 7 adventures. We just, we didn't argue. Ron and I didn't argue. We negotiated. Well, sometimes there was a loud negotiation. But we always came to a conclusion, like even, let's say we just totally agreed to disagree, and he would get to do something I didn't like, and I would get to do something he didn't like. It was totally different things. But that was our way of resolving. But it was never, you can't do that, or you can't see that person. None of that. And we never went to bed mad, ever. Never. Because it doesn't get better when you're trying to sleep. So if you have to hash things out, and what I wouldn't give for just one more of those negotiations. What's that? I want to make sure I can get everything. He was a great history buff. One of the reasons we traveled lots of places, we watched something on PBS or Nova, and he said, well, let's go there. Let's visit. And that's how we went to lots of places. So we loved doing that, and we just did all that. What's that? Sorry, I'm getting in my notes here. Sure, I'll get it on there. Oh, 60 Minutes. They were doing this awful piece on Coach Jerry Tartani, because Coach Tark didn't care if you could be a student. He only cared if you could play basketball. So they were in trouble. There were several students not going to classes. Students had drug problems. and there was a sword fight. There were a couple players that had to be bailed out of jail. So you're doing this ugly piece at 60 minutes, and all of a sudden they switch to the arena. And there's Ron selling raffle tickets. Now I'm starting going down. I go, you're part of this, Ron. You're raising the money for the machine. He's out there hawking for raffle tickets. So he loved to do that. So we got on national TV doing that, and that tape is still out there. I found it, I think, last year. I found it still out there on that. So I have everything here. I'll conclude with this card. I'll get through this. Sandy had this laminated. I gave him this little tiny ball-sized card more than 20 years ago. And keep this little card as a reminder that you are the one who makes hopes worth sharing, dreams worth daring, risks worth taking, plans worth making, life worth living, love worth giving. You're my husband, my one and only love. And I found this in his wallet after he passed. So he saved it. I have it laminated now. And I never knew he saved it. I didn't mess with his stuff. I didn't look at his wallet. And so that meant a lot that he saved this. You know, some people keep pictures. So he did save that. I'm about done. We have a few other people to speak, and so let me do that. I want to introduce Brian T. Clark, who wrote a beautiful note. I can't read it. I need Brian to read it for me. Brian.
When I wrote this to Ron, I had no idea that I would be actually reading it to you guys. It was a message. It was a message that I wrote to Ron 3 days before he died, because I live by the philosophy that you should always tell the person while they are still alive how important they are to you. You should not wait until a funeral where we sit around and we talk about the good of this person. You should tell the person. And so that's what I did. Is I sat down, I wrote this message out to Ron, because he was a very special person in my life. As a writer, I depend on a really good editor before my books go out. And Ron got a hold of my very first book that I had written, and he comes up to me and he says, I enjoyed the book, but I found 2 typos in there. And I'm like, okay, thank you, you know? But that's how honest he was. He was just it didn't matter how I would take something, but he felt that he had to be honest with me and tell me, you know, there's 2 typos in that book. So just like my husband loves to read books and find typos. That's his thing. He loves to find typos in it. So I asked my husband never read my books. So a couple of years ago, I was getting ready to publish another book, and I have what's called beta readers, and it's a team of people who will read the book prior to it being published. And this team of people will get together, they will read the manuscript, and they provide me as the author feedback on the book and the characters and the plot and how fast the book moves, how quickly the book closes at the end. And so all of this information is really critical to me, because I don't want to publish a book and realize that it took you 50 pages to get into the book. So I knew Ron would be good at this. He'd be a really good beta reader. But I was too intimidated to ask him. So I had put out on my email that I was looking for a beta reader, because I had lost a beta reader, and so I needed another one. So Ron quickly emailed me back and said, I'll do it. And so I hired him right there on the spot. You know, didn't have to interview him, didn't have to have him do any samples, because I knew that he would do a really good job for me. And he did that. 30 days later, when he brought the book back to me, I had given him a stack of Post-it notes, and so, you know, wherever you find a mistake or wherever you have a question about something, you know, you put that Post-it note on there. When I get the manuscript back, I'll address all that stuff. So he gives me the manuscript back, and it is doubled in size because of all the Post-it notes he's put in it. And he's like, here you go. So I look at it, and I'm like, wow, okay, do you mind if I take this home and look at it? Because I don't want to look at it in front of you. You know? And true to form, he did an amazing job for me. An amazing job. And that's how smart this guy was. He was so smart that I almost wish I could have had him as my editor. He was that good. So about a week before he passed away, I had called, just checking in on him, just seeing how he's doing, because you know they are neighbors. They just live right around the corner from me. But I was hunkered down because of the pandemic, so I couldn't go over there. And as much as Gary had asked me to come over, I just could not do it because it was in the middle of the pandemic. It was just too many from the first day that I met you. There was something about you the moment that we started talking, and I said, I like this guy. I admit, I was a little intimidated by you because you're so smart. But I also said to myself, you're the kind of person I want to surround myself with. And so I did. And I established a friendship with you and your husband that is deep in my heart. I'm glad we became friends, and I will cherish the moments we had together. I remember the night you had us over for dinner, and we laughed for hours about nothing. The only thing that wasn't funny was me trying to sit in your chair. Although Gary did all of the cooking, you were a gracious host. I will never thank you enough for the honest feedback and constructive criticism regarding my writing. You have improved my books with your input more than you will ever know. And he did. There were many times at the men's mixers where I walked into the room and I didn't know anyone. And then I looked across the room and I saw you and Gary. And I knew this night would be okay because I had you guys there. My sweet friend, thank you for being in my life. I will always love you, my friend. And he died 3 days later. And Gary called me and said that he did read the letter to him, and he did hear my words. So I leave this with you. Don't wait until the funeral to tell the person how special they are. Let them know it every time you talk to them. Thank you.
We're going to have some other speakers after the lunch, but we just have a couple more and then we have to eat. We've gone a little long. That's okay. The food is ready. Eddie J is next to speak, and then we'll have Douglas
And then
have
take a break.
back, and then we'll have the meal, and then people can speak after that. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Jay. The son that Ron never had. You know, when I met Ron, I first met Gary. And between the two of them, they've been nothing but a wonderful inspiration to my life. And I really appreciate them and appreciate everything they've done for me and all the knowledge they've given. And Ron specifically, you know, he's very down to earth. His way of thinking, if I was hyper, he could make it just humble it out, humble all the whole situation. So I looked up some quotes, and One of them is, be the things you loved most about the people who are gone. I believe that's a true statement. There are absolutely some things that I have done and I've applied that he's taught me in life that, that I am now that he's passed away. I don't just mourn over him, and I have, and I do privately, but I always remember, what would Ron do? And I've been in some really sticky situations in the last couple of years that I've gone, and I've asked Ron, and he's been gone since December, obviously, so only for the last year, but there's some questions there's some situations I've been in this year, and I go, what would Ron say to this? And it's helped me get out of some situations, so I kind of leave you with that quote, it's kind of, if he's inspired you in any way, it just sounds like he has to a lot of people. Be the guy or gal that he was to you. So, the other thing I just wanted to run by, another quote. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal. I believe that's very true. I talk to Gary almost every single day, and that poor man, he is so broken-hearted. Love leaves a memory no one can steal. And that is what Gary has. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of stories and memories. 24 years? 24 years of it. And I know that everyone, his family, his friends, have thousands of memories as well. Some have been shared with me, some that I'm sure are still private. Some appropriate for this memorial, some less appropriate. At the end of the day, cherish them. Cherish all the memories that that you've created with Ron. So, that's all I really have to say, but thank you.
And Douglas.
I'll walk quickly and I'll try to talk quickly too. I don't know if any of you have ever felt the type of pressure that's involved in being told you're the only thing standing between you people and that food. I promise to be brief. I've enjoyed very much of everything about what's been said about Ron here today. Particularly enjoyed Jim referring to the travel and, if I can paraphrase you, how you perhaps don't know the half of it, and the nervous laughter that elicited, especially from this side of the room. Further to that, my husband Jeff, who's unfortunately unable to be here today, had written to Gary something about Ron, which I'll read out from Jeff. So this is Jeff speaking. Dear Gary, it is with regret that I'll be unable to attend Ron's memorial this upcoming Sunday. Douglas will be attending, however, will represent my sadness and memories. I will be working all day that day. All that said, I wanted to reach out and say not only how sad I am about losing a friend, but wanted to make sure I let you know how grateful I am for his friendship over the years. Ron was kind, generous, and so much fun. He was an inspiration to young gay men who are trying to navigate their lives. Not only just that, he truly allowed a person not to be judged, but indulge in the wonderfulness of life. Our times at your house for parties were just sensational. In addition, the way you and Ron helped Andrew become a kind, decent, caring, and admired individual is utterly amazing. Considering the background and life he led, you and Ron as a couple turned his life around and helped him feel valued and cared for. You both raised up a young human being with kindness, and it paid off. Andrew is someone you can be proud of. There is no better thing to do in this world. I admire Ron so much and the powerful impact you and he made as a couple for him. I'm very sad writing this. His life will forever be in my heart. I can only imagine the amount of pain you must be going through, but I sincerely hope you find some comfort in knowing how much he was loved and was a valuable part of so many lives. My love to you always, Jeff. to that, I will only add briefly before everyone makes a run over there, that although Jim, you had the good sense never to try and engage him on physics, I did once try to do that. And having heard something briefly online about string theory, and I decided to ask him what the hell it meant. And because I did remember thinking that there was a sense in which I was going to be able to hold my own, and I couldn't. I did just want to say that to you. To Gary, I will say only briefly, if I may, that the amount of sheer bad luck which you have now had to navigate over the last few years is almost unfathomable to all of us in this room. But the good fortune that you and all of us had to have Ron in our lives for all the years that we did, I hope in some part helps to make up for it. He approached the end, as people have mentioned, with a dignity and a strength which I found almost incomprehensible. I know that Jeff did too. And as we parted company, I believe about 2 weeks before the end of his life, I don't remember what was said in that moment, but I do specifically recall that shortly before we got together in that room to say goodbye to him for the last time, he said to me, when no one else was in the room, in a sort of offhanded kind of way, you know, Douglas, everyone should be so lucky to have a husband like Gary. And whilst I don't remember the last exchange we had, that as a sentiment will forever be in my heart. And thank you for having shared him with us for all these years.
Thank you.